Friends all, shalom. Can I acknowledge particularly ZFA? Thank you, Alon, Jeremy, the leadership, and all members of the community who have come together. It is wonderful to be able to see you here, to see the national leadership with ECAJ here as well, to be here with parliamentary colleagues, state and federal, David and Michelle. One of you will like a little more of what I have to say than the other, I fear. But importantly, to have this opportunity to stand once more with Australia's wonderful, vibrant, engaged, leading Jewish community that gives so much to our nation and in doing so contributes so much in the stance of our nation internationally and particularly in our friendship and our support for Israel. Around 11 months ago, I had one of those most impactful experiences in your life that you never forget nor take away. And that, of course, was visiting Israel. December last year, a country still well and truly shaken to the core by the events that had occurred on October 7. The streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem as I had never seen them before and would hope to never see them again in terms of the absence of activity, the lack of the usual zest and love of life and engagement that we would usually see. But of course, most impactful being walking through Kibbutz Kfar Aza, visiting once more Sderot and standing on the site of the police station that I had previously visited, but which stood no more, and understanding in all too vivid and graphic terms the horrors that had occurred on October 7 last year. And whilst, like many, my support for Israel had always been strong, it's impossible to have left an experience like that, to have undertaken a journey like that, and to not find that resolve redoubled and that commitment strengthened in how we as a world, we as a country, and I hope we as a future government again, can best position ourselves to be able to support Israel and the Jewish people in the fight against those who stand against a home for Jews and in the fight against anti-Semitism that all too often tragically drives people to think about the need to be in that Jewish homeland. And indeed, in the shocking times that have followed, perhaps some of the most powerful have been around dining room tables. Those some of you even in this room have been with me, whilst people have said that the rise in anti-Semitism they have felt, the fears they see in the community have made them wonder whether they or their neighbours wonder or their families wonder or, well and truly, the parents of other school children wonder whether perhaps they would be safer in Israel. It's hard to think of something more shocking to hear as an Australian, that fellow Australians would be wondering whether they might be safer in a country at war, they might be more secure in a country under attack, that they might feel their liberties better protected in a country who has too many neighbours committed to its destruction. That's a feeling that is intolerable and unacceptable in our country, and it is one that we must all be committed to ensuring that we eliminate. Your children, your grandchildren should be as safe and as comfortable and as free going to their chosen schools as my children are each day. No less ambition is worth our country, and though it has not been the case for far too long, it should be the ultimate ambition of what we strive for. Now, we are at that point of the political cycle where you will be asked in the next 6 months or so to cast a vote. And I do want to look back, and I'm going to be a little more partisan than sometimes I am, to what has occurred, not just over the last 12 months since October 7, but I want to go back to the last election and through some of the events up till now, but also importantly for you to look forward in terms of where we stand as a party and our approach to the future. But going back to that last election, there were assurances that there were no fundamental differences between the parties of government. That is what you as a community were told. That is what appears in black and white in community newspapers and was given as statements by leading members of the now government. You were let down. You could even go so far as to say you were betrayed in relation to those assurances. Before we even get to the horrors of October 7 and what's occurred in the time since, the current government changed Australia's votes at the Human Rights Commission, where we had previously stood clearly with the US and other partners about the disproportionate focus applied to Israel relative to other countries of the world. The Albanese government backed away from supporting and co-sponsoring those resolutions. The current government, despite having promised no changes and a common approach, made the unilateral change in terms of the recognition of the state of Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, as Israel's capital. The current government decided to make the changes to how the Palestinian territories were described. Occupied Palestinian territories became the description officially of the Australian government. Illegal settlements became the official terminology used in all cases. The current government doubled funding to UNRWA. All of this occurred prior to October 7, 2024. In the time since, there has been much greater public attention to the points of difference. But at that point of time, in the weeks and aftermath of October 7, we did our best to try to stand politically as one. Bipartisanship mattered a great deal at that time. When the Parliament came together to pass a bipartisan resolution condemning the horrors of October 7 and backing Israel's inherent right to self-defence at the core of that resolution, the Prime Minister and Peter Dutton, Penny Wong and I sat down in the PM's office and hammered out the text of that resolution to get us all on the one page. And we did so engaging with some of the leaders in this room to make sure we understood where the red lines existed, what had to be there. But also we heard and we listened to the message that came from the leaders in this room and from the Jewish community generally, that they wanted bipartisanship and they wanted us to stand as one. And we got the Parliament to do so. And subsequently, there have been moments where we have still managed to do that. When we reached a tipping point around the use of phrases such as from the river to the sea, I brought forward a motion to the Senate, again worded in terms to ensure the Labor Party could and would support it, so that we sent a message of bipartisanship. But where that bipartisanship has waned, it is not because the Liberal Party has changed position. We have been resolute in long-standing positions in relation to support for Israel, in long-standing positions in relation to the Middle East, and in long-standing positions in relation to support for allies. The government did not respond with the strength we thought was necessary militarily in supporting the US and allies in the Red Sea when the call came. We should have a ship on rotation providing that practical support against those Iranian-sponsored terrorists. Australia should not have voted for a UN ceasefire motion that failed to even mention Hamas. Australia should not have voted for a UN motion advancing the recognition of a Palestinian state that did so without resolving any of the necessary preconditions, and in fact appears to have seen a fundamental change in the government's official position, where issues like security guarantees, recognition of the right to exist, let alone issues of borders and questions of rights of return, none of them apparently need to be advanced now. Instead, we need a time frame for recognition. That is not our position. And as we look forward, I want to give you a very clear assurance that if a Liberal National government is elected, we will be ensuring that when it comes to recognition, when it comes to questions around a two-state solution or any other alternative pathway towards a potential peace, we will be holding clear to the necessary preconditions for that. And those necessary preconditions start with recognising Israel's right to exist and start with ensuring Israel's security and ability to live in peace. Thank you. We also do recognise, as I said before, that pain, that scourge of anti-Semitism that has swept too much of the world and too much of our country. We will follow through in delivering on Julian Leese's proposed judicial inquiry into anti-Semitism. We will take action, particularly in relation to our universities, and require them to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism and require that to be embedded in the processes of those universities. We will cancel the visas of extremists and hate preachers and those who promote anti-Semitism in protests and other fora. We will work to list the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation. It's been good enough for the US, it's been good enough for Canada. Keir Starmer's government in the UK are committed to doing so. If our partners, our closest partners, can do so, recognising that it all goes back to Iran and their evil undertakings, then it's good enough for Australia to do so. And we won't be tolerating an Iranian ambassador in Australia who continues to promote the elimination of Israel, the killing of Jews, and the bringing of hatred into our country. Now, there are plenty of ambassadors in our country and elsewhere whose views and whose values and whose position of their government we would fundamentally disagree with. But there are limits, and the current ambassador has crossed those lines by not only advocating evil to government or defending it to government in his diplomatic duties, he has promoted it in our community from the protection of a diplomat, and that is truly unacceptable. We will redirect UNRWA funding. Let me be clear. I don't question for a second the significant humanitarian need that exists for many individuals in Gaza. And I want to see aid get through and humanitarian assistance delivered. And it is important that we are clear about that, because it is about, ultimately, the human well-being of fellow peoples where they are genuine, innocent individuals in need. But we cannot be in a situation where Australian taxpayer dollars are at risk of going into the hands of those who promote, support, let alone undertake terrorist deeds. And so we will work, much as there may be resistance in some pockets and quarters, we will work to find and support the alternative means of delivery. So friends, as we approach that election next year, let's not be under any doubt. I'm not standing here saying there is no difference. I'm not suggesting that it will all be the same. I want you to know there is a difference, there will be changes, and we will deliver, if elected to government, upon those changes. This is a crucial time to stand with the Jewish community, to show the clarity of leadership in doing so. Many of you have seen and heard Peter Dutton do so with conviction and with real clarity in his beliefs and undertaking to your community and to Israel. That is shared right across our team, and there is no doubt in our minds about the importance of continuing to do so, that it is important for this community in Australia. It is important for our relations with our allies and partners, including the Democratic State of Israel. But it is also important in a broader geopolitical context where we do see Iran cooperating and working alongside Russia and North Korea, and with the challenge and questions over where China's ambitions sit within this destabilisation regime that is bringing such mayhem and pain to so much of the world, and where tragically Jewish communities are at the heart of it. Tomorrow will be 29 years since the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. It's quite a journey to think of where the world was and where it is, and the horrors of what he would see and think of today. Our hope has to be to get to that place where your children are free to go safely and freely to school, where Israel can live securely alongside its neighbours. It feels a long way away. It probably is. But we should have the resolve and the determination to work to get there, because it's only with that resolve and determination that we will take the right, good, moral and proper steps along that journey. Thanks very much for the chance to be with you. And I think I'm taking a couple of questions, if I haven't spoken too long. But I haven't spotted Amir yet, so.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
We've got time for just a small handful of questions. So who would like to ask Simon a question? Yes, Ms.
Daniel?
Senator, Jeremy Liebler and I recently wrote to the Prime Minister and to Peter Dutton, and also to some of the Teals. And we asked about the preparedness to put the Greens last in preferencing because of their divisiveness and because of their stirring up matters which lead to anti-Semitism. And there is a point of difference there between your party and the government, and I'd invite you to speak on that.
Thank you. And you don't need, in some ways, to ask the question of us, because you can look at the track record. We do put the Greens last. We have put the Greens last. I expect us to put the Greens last in future. We've seen the extremist tendencies that the Greens bring forth on a range of levels, and as a senator, I've been exposed to them perhaps a little longer than some of my House colleagues, although they've got all too much of a taste of it in this Parliament. And that is something we've got to turn the corner on, in that growth of Greens representation in the Parliament, and particularly in the House of Representatives. The test falls upon the Labor Party. You look at the 3 seats in Brisbane that the Greens won at the last election, they won 2 of those off of us, and they only won them because of Labor preferences. So those 2 Greens are only there because the Labor Party put them there, and that's before you get to preference flows elsewhere. So I hope your call will be heeded, and I urge the community to be very strong and forceful in messages to the Labor Party about the expectations there, because this is the election where this can be made a bigger issue and change that behaviour and make it unacceptable for the preferencing of those extremist parties.
Yeah.
Just where the Liberal Party sits with regards to the ABC and the SBS as to how they are portraying the facts or the truth or their interpretation of it.
Perpetually frustrated, I suspect, is the short answer to that question, and I say perpetually because you can go back to John Howard's era when John Howard attempted to put good, solid citizens on the ABC board and to effect change, only to be frustrated. Previous government tried the same. Scott Morrison saw Ida Buttrose as a possible different type of figure from the ones John Howard had tried to effect change. And yet I think part of the challenge we're seeing is that those efforts have been running contrary to the global tendency of media to increasingly speak to narrower and narrower audiences. And that is one of the threats that I see to the way in which cohesive democracies work around the world. And it's an entirely different topic, but it is this self-selection of media and media repeating views back to an audience. And in doing so, you're creating narrower and narrower silos of communication. Now, how we go about tackling the ABC and SBS, it is a real challenge. We, in seeing the need for Australian voices and Australian content, and not wanting to go into this election arguing for some great savage funding cut, upheaval or otherwise, but we absolutely want to find the right policies, pathway, people to try to hold them to account for balanced, accurate reporting. Reporting, not commentary, but reporting.
Time for 2 last questions. So we'll go Sarah and then Talia.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. I was intrigued to learn last week from a visitor from the UAE who's here in Australia. His name is Amjad Taha, and he'll be speaking at a few events this week, that in the UAE, anti-Semitism, it's not just not an opinion, it's a crime, and that there is zero tolerance for anti-Semitism in the country, and that Holocaust education is compulsory across all schools in the country, in the UAE. How far away are we from instituting something like that in Australia, where anti-Semitism is a crime and Holocaust education is compulsory across all schools?
Well, I think, firstly, quickly, I remember as I flew through to Israel last year, one of the things that struck me most, in the portfolio sense as Shadow Foreign Minister, was flying through Dubai. It had been too long since I'd been to Israel on my previous trip, and I certainly wasn't flying through Dubai on the previous trip. And yet here we were, just weeks after October 7, with conflict underway, and yet the Abraham Accords standing strong and firm and providing not just that physical transport benefit, but the economic and security benefits. And if there are little glimmers of hope I take out of the horrors of the last year, the way in which all those who signed the Abraham Accords have stood firm is one of them. The fact that Saudi Arabia stood up to help intervene attacks from Iran is one of them. when we look for hope for the future, they're the glimmers of hope in the foreign policy context. I think there probably are lessons there that we can learn. Teaching about the Holocaust is part of our curriculum, but how we do that and how we more effectively embed teaching on anti-Semitism is essential. Ensuring we do uphold our current laws is important. We see too many actions of hatred, too many vile protests that are policed for the keeping of immediate peace and security in that environment, but where the law, when it comes to actually the perpetuating of hatred and promoting of terrorism, is not properly upheld. So upholding our current laws, and indeed credit to the community for stepping forward and filling the void in that regard by taking legal action against hate preachers that indeed authorities should be able to step up and do. But I think powerful example, and one certainly that I'm happy to look into in terms of what, of all things, we could learn about tackling anti-Semitism from the UAE.
So this is very strange coming from my political stance, speaking with you, as anyone in the room might see my chutzah. I've always traditionally voted Greens. This is the first year that I am questioning where I stand and whom I will vote for. I can't say, other than your support for Israel, I align with any of the Liberal Party's values. So in your words, and someone who has years of diplomatic experience, having your opinions heard and conveyed in Parliament, actively pursuing change, getting your perspective across, how might those of us who want to vote for not yourself, no offence, how might we communicate that with other political parties in a way that they will hear it and respond accordingly, rather than be defensive and spout echo chamber rhetoric?
Well, thank you for your honesty and courage, firstly. It's a room where it's not easy to say all that you just said, and so full credit in that regard. Obviously, I want to try to persuade you, because every vote counts, and it should be my job to try to win them over one at a time where I have to. But in realising that that is part of the challenge, let me say, when it comes to other parties, I think the Greens are a lost cause would be my first point. And that is because it seems that the extremism, sadly the nature of their embrace of university politics and the way in which they seek to play too many of those games is just far too deeply embedded. And at those points of bipartisanship, let's remember that bipartisan motion I spoke about earlier that we pursued after October 7. Even the Greens then, at that point in time, couldn't bring themselves to vote for it. Now, for other parties, we have to indeed hope that they're not a lost cause. I don't want to encourage anybody to go and join and get engaged in the Labor Party, because that's not for me to do or in my interests. But I think they have to see and hear the message that where they've gone is unacceptable and where they need to be is clearly defined to them. Now, how that message is delivered, look, ultimately, in our system, it is still best delivered at the ballot box. People can try to change from within. Sometimes you can affect that change. I hope the Greens see and hear it clearly at the ballot box, and that perhaps after the last couple of state and territory elections, they might be starting to see and hear that message a little bit. Labor, I think, also needs to see and hear that message. And they will hear it more powerfully if they feel it at the ballot box. One of the issues to try to appeal a tinge on the environmental side, although I suspect we could have a long debate about that too, but One of the issues that will be defining at the next election, outside of all we've talked about, will be in the energy market space. What are the reasons why we're pursuing a zero emissions nuclear energy policy? Well, some of it is to do with support for obviously reliable energy in the future, for underpinning industry, for all of those economic needs. But some of it is also in the first two words I just used to describe that, zero emissions. We heard a message from the electorate, and in presenting an energy policy for the future, we're trying to respond to that message from the electorate and do so in a way that we think is more responsible and conducive to the nation's long-term interests. On these questions of support for Israel and that policy, Labor needs to hear a message from the electorate too, one way or another.